Hello friends, so with 2025 just about behind us, I thought we would flip the page into the new year and discuss some of the new releases that I have my eye on. These are going to mostly be in quarter one of 2026, with one of them being a book that was published earlier this month. But yeah, I got a few of them on hand. Some of them I've read, some of them I'll be reading in the coming months. Let's talk about them. Starting chronologically with the book that was published earlier this month in December, that is Berlin Shuffle by Ulrich Alexander Baschwitz. This book was not on my radar, but I'm so glad it caught my eye and I had the chance to read it because it is a riotous comedy. It's a breath of fresh air, and it really was a perfect ending to my 2025. The book is set in post-World War I Berlin within the Weimar Republic, and it really immerses you within the mayhem and the hysteria of the time period. You see drastic inflation, mass unemployment, corruption, prostitution, these underground criminal rings, everything. And the way that the book is structured and written really draws you into the book with every chapter. Each chapter works sort of like an episode that adds in a new character, fills you in on their past and their peculiar features or traits, but you're generally following three beggars. One of them is this barrel-sized buffoon that has escaped an asylum. The general leader is this man, Funholes, who has been unemployed for a while. He's an older man. And then you have this younger, erratic, temperamental character, as well. And this trio kind of sticks together, generally just seeking out money, handouts, or just generally panhandlers. But towards the end of the novel, the chapters slowly start to cinch up the story and lead all the characters to the same setting, which is this pub called the Jolly Huntsman. And this is where chaos ensues, a murder takes place, and a lot of political commentary and a beautiful metaphor is expounded upon within the book. The social commentary, the political satire, the characters, the dialogue, all of that is brilliant in this book. But for me, the most charming feature was the comedy, was the satire, and it really read like The 12 Chairs by Ilfin Petrov, which is a Soviet satire that I've raved about on the channel several times. And this isn't quite in that slapstick humor style, but it's stomach cramping laughter from start to finish. The characters are lively, they truly leap off the page in their descriptions, and they're just... This book is full of oddballs, quirky personas, and eccentrics, and it really does draw you into this crazy time period, this frenzied era within German history. So like I said, the book is already out, and I published my review on my Substack, which I'll link in the description. But if you're looking for a fun, lighthearted, and just riotous book, this is for you. Next up is The School of Night by Karl Uwe Knausgaard, and this is set to be published on January 13th, 2026. Now, this is a book I already discussed in my last video, actually, and pointed out a lot of my issues with it, the flaws in my eyes with it, and all of that will be outlined in greater detail in my written review when that's published closer to this release. But to give a little bit more context to this book, this is a continuation of Karl Uwe Knausgaard's Morning Star series, but it very much operates like a standalone, with some slight references throughout the book. And of course, the main character, Christian Hedlund, appears within the first book as well. So it is connected to the series, but I do truly believe it reads largely like a standalone piece. And who is Christian? Christian is this young, ambitious photographer, but more than that, he is a narcissist. He is egotistic. He is truly insufferable. And there's a lot of pieces of his personality that make him insufferable on top of his actions, whether it's completely abandoning his family on Christmas in the midst of an overdose from a family member, whether it's him leading on a girl at a bar and then abandoning her and leaving her apartment once he sees that she has a younger child and he's no longer sexually interested in her. Or it's him getting temperamental, like a petulant child, because his photography series is critiqued in front of his classroom at the school he's attending in London. The examples are endless within this book for reasons why this is a person that is just the most detestable, deplorable type of character you could follow. Whether it's the misogyny, the bigotry, again, the narcissism, whatever it is, this is a hard book to read purely from the narrator perspective, because it's written generally like a suicide letter, a kind of reflection piece, if you will, on the events that transpired in his life and that led him to this miserable, depressive state that he's in. Now, A lot of this book, the parts that do work really well is, and where it's kind of centered around, is Christian Marlowe's Dr. Faustus. And this is a book that, of course, deals with Mephistopheles and making this deal with the devil and trading your soul for whether it could be fame, genius, wealth, whatever it is. And that's generally what happens in this book. It's not quite on the nose. You have this Dutch artist that he meets, this very eccentric, strange character named Hans, who very much works like the devil. He shows up later in time, and so he kind of has this immortal aspect to him. But it's not quite as direct or anything like that, but it's playing with that theme. And he's also playing with some other occultist historical characters, specifically from England as well in this novel. And I think that when Knausgaard does that, it has a lot of promise. It has a lot of potential. And those elements, I think, were pretty creative. And there's parts of it, but specifically this play scene towards the end where the play is kind of being enacted within the book, that does feel very ominous. You feel the tension. It feels sinister and dark. And, it gives you that kind of eerie feeling. When it does that, it's great. But, as I mentioned, the character itself is pretty hard to get past. And that's fine. Like a detestable character, an insufferable narrator, isn't something that makes a book inherently bad. However, the dialogue is just dry. A lot of the descriptions are prosaic and just a lot of meandering, which is somewhat part and parcel with Knausgaard's style, and sometimes I really like that, like in Mein Kampf, My Struggle, or even in his Seasons Quartet that I've been reading lately. I don't really mind it. I think it's part of his style, and so I'm not going to hate on it too much, but I'm also not going to romanticize it. I'm going to be upfront. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And for me, those are some of my issues with the book. Additionally, I'll say that a lot of the characters, generally all of them I would say, feel very one-note, one-dimensional. Not only are they static, but they're just uninteresting. So my general perspective with this book, I'm not really selling it on you, I'm sure, but my general perspective with this book is if you are not already into this series, if you're not already bought in, then I don't know, I can't recommend the series, and I definitely can't recommend this book. However, if you are a huge Knausgaard fan, if you are very much connected to those occultish themes, if you're willing to kind of give him a leash, right, with some of these characters or some of these stylistic elements, right, then maybe it's for you. But so far, I was unfortunately disappointed with this work of fiction from Knausgaard. The next book that I'm keeping my eye on is Volga Blues by Marozil Gimion, and that's set to be published on January 20th, 2026. And this is following a journalist who snuck into Russia posing as an Italian historian, and he collects these first-hand accounts and interviews with ordinary Russian citizens with the goal of essentially capturing the zeitgeist, the current temperature politically, socially, culturally, religiously within the country, exploring the rising either patriotism or sympathy for the Soviet Union, for Soviet ideology, the increasing divisiveness, both towards the East and Russia towards the West, but also exploring Western views towards Russia and Russophobia and the kind of just lack of awareness, I would say, of Western countries and attitudes towards Russian Orthodoxy, Russian culture, agriculture. And what I like that the book does, according to the description and the details provided, is that, as the title would indicate, it roots a lot of the reporting in the Volga River, which is a massive river that runs deep into Russia. It's had immense historical and modern relevance and implications for the country, the culture, the people, agriculture, everything. And so beyond the political commentary, analysis, examination, all of that is what seems to be a cultural exploration into the people, their livelihoods, their cuisines, local, seasonal produce, all of that, the religious side of things, the increase in orthodoxy within Russia, and the churches themselves, all of that. So this is a book that, of course, would be right up my alley, but I think it'll be a very fascinating read for just about everybody. The next work is The Disappearing Act by Maria Stepanova, set to be published by New Directions on February 17th, 2026. And I feel kind of conflicted with this book. It's a very short novel following a middle-aged author who is fleeing her home country, which is never specifically stated, or maybe it's slightly stated at the end, but it's generally following a writer fleeing Russia. Very much reads like autofiction of Maria Stepanova herself, who I believe has fled Russia, if not, still lives in Russia, but writes a lot of dissident and emigre literature. And that generally is the theme of this work, is you're following this middle-aged author who is fleeing Russia, who feels very, not even just conflicted, but feels morally condemned herself because of the actions of Russia upon what's stated in this book as a neighboring country, which is of course hinting at Ukraine. And each chapter follows her trek west towards this literary convention. And spliced between her stops at these different cities and borders and the numerous delays she's experiencing are these memories and recollections and reflections on her childhood in Russia, but also her sense of guilt and shame and sin that she's carrying as a Russian native, as a Russian ethic. And the reason I feel conflicted about the book isn't because of the large stroke that it's painting here, which is a condemnation of violence, a condemnation of aggression, of war, of wrongdoing from the Russian government regime. My disagreement or conflict with the novel is with the collective guilt that she assigns to an entire nation of people, an entire ethnicity. That being that all Russians are culpable for the actions of the government, or even the actions of previous governments, of Stalinist regime, Soviet Union. Any past wrongdoings are this indelible stain, basically, that is on the ethnicity, that is inherited. So there's this kind of wrongdoing, this sin, this shame, this guilt that is inherited by all Russians. And even something that stains the language, the Russian language. She kind of describes in the book that, you know, she's almost speaking in the same tongue as the beast. You know, she's speaking within the same language as the monster, the oppressor, you know, the aggressor. And I understand where she's coming from, and I think she does it in a very beautiful, poetic way. And it's certainly a fascinating question, you know, about the culpability of bystanders, the culpability of citizens within a country. But I just find it to have no legs to really stand on. Just when I think about, you know, does Spanish culture, is that culpable and permanently stained by the Inquisition? Is Germany and Germanic people, their entire heritage and culture stained by Nazism? Is America permanently stained forever by slavery, or Britain for the colonies? You know, you can go on and on. Every culture, every nation is going to have some list of shameful sins and wrongdoings. And it's not that we shouldn't acknowledge them, or that, you know, we should just look past them and absolve a nation or a government for those actions, especially ones that are ongoing, right? But I don't find language to be something that is culpable for the actions of who uses it. I see it as a tool. It's kind of like blaming the pen for the words that are being written with it, or the sword for where the sword strikes. It just seems a bit dangerous and reckless to assign that to language, to an entire ethnicity, to an entire culture. I think that's a little bit of a mistake, but I understand where she's coming from, and it's really interesting to read some of this new wave of emigre literature that is emerging in recent decades from Russia, other countries as well, but definitely within Russia, whether it's Vladimir Sorokin, Maria Stepanova, Ludmila Ulitskaya, and others. So it's definitely this new wave, whereas we think of generally some of the wave that emerged around the Bolshevik Revolution, Ivan Bunin, Nabokov, and many others. So definitely a work to pay attention to. And if you are fascinated with that idea of collective guilt, you're looking for a very short poetic read, it's worth checking out. Jumping in here real quick, because I forgot to mention when I originally filmed this that a lot of the novel is also dealing with the shedding of identity, the separation or severing of oneself into different parts, like a past and a future, a former self and a future self. There's this symbolism of literally severing one in half, of renewal, and so that's also a key part of this novel. That's also connected to the idea of language, of a kind of guilty or shameful past, and that the only way is kind of through letting the previous self, the former associations with one's own heritage or ethnicity or whatever, letting that go. And this sort of metamorphosis kind of that's going on, I think, is also a key theme that Stepanova is exploring quite well within this work. And the last book that is on my radar, flashing with bright lights, is The Beginnings by Antonio Moresco, and that is said to be published by Deep Vellum on March 24th, 2026. This is a book that has had a lot of hype around it, again, within the communities that love experimental literature. And Deep Vellum has published a lot of experimental literature. Last year, they published Schadenfreude. Previously, they published Solenoid by Mircea Cărtărescu, and they're going to be publishing Theodorus by Cărtărescu in the fall of next year. So they're a publishing house that I love because they take a lot of risks, and sometimes they swing big and miss, and sometimes they swing big and knock it out the park. Solenoid won international awards. It was one of my favorite books. It still is one of my favorite books I've ever read, and other people as well. But they don't work for everyone. But let me transition back to The Beginnings. What is The Beginnings? Well, it's actually the first part in a trilogy called Games of Eternity. And this is a book following a nameless narrator who appears to be silent throughout the work, but works as a vessel, or you could say as a tool for us to kind of peer into this absurdist, surrealist story. We're following him from a monastery to social settings, to political factions, and all sorts of different settings within Italy. It features a style and imagery that is compared to Franz Kafka and Virginia Woolf, and generally is just known for being uncanny, strange, hard to pinpoint or fit into any sort of genre or category. And that may not sell many of you, but it certainly piques my interest, and I'm open to it, and I'm excited for it. I've even had, I have a few Italian followers on Instagram, and one of them direct messaged me about this novel when they saw that it was going to be published in English, and raved about it. Raved that, finally Moresco is getting some of the attention that he rightfully deserves to an English audience. So I'm very much excited about this book. Obviously, it's going to be interesting. If this book bombs, it's going to be hard for Deep Vellum to continue to publish the trilogy and maintain the hype that will carry it forward. But I have high but moderate expectations. I'm certainly hopeful and optimistic about it, and I think that it will be a book that, I don't know, suits me, suits my interests, suits the kind of zany and experimental type of literature I'm open-minded to. I don't always love it, but I certainly enjoy it. So yeah, that's another book that I'm keeping my eye on that I will definitely be reading in the new year. But let me know, do any of these grab your attention? Are you willing to give The Beginnings a chance? Or does that kind of experimental literature usually turn you off? You're not here to take a chance on something like that. Let me know in the comments, like the video if you enjoyed it. Let me know, is there a new release that I'm not aware of that I didn't mention in this video that is on your radar? Let me know in the comments down below. Subscribe for more content, and I will see you all in the next one in the new year.